Hello and welcome to the Reorg, where we dive into the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute archives and re-examine old ideas after years of accumulated proof of work. This is your host, Michael Goldstein, also known as Bitstein, and joining me as always is my co-host, Pierre Rochard. Pierre, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. How are y'all?
I'm doing well. Today we're continuing into the mempool crash course as we've been doing. I think we're probably about halfway through this series, so that's very exciting. And we're kind of continuing on the same vein of altcoins that we've been doing. Last time we discussed app coins, and today we're talking about blockchain technology.
My favorite topic, yes.
Yes. So this is a 2016 article by Daniel Krawisz called "It's Not About the Technology, It's About the Money." So this was July 13th, 2016. The price was about $658. The image, I was happy when I made this image because it's the monorail guy from The Simpsons, where he talks mono equals one and rail equals rail. But I made it blockchain equals computers, technology equals technology. Just trying to, scam people. The one thing, and maybe we'll talk about this, kind of after the article. One thing going back and looking at this that I was surprised by, because I hadn't read this one in a long time, and I remember really enjoying it when it was written, but it's less about like the problems with blockchain technology so much as defending the idea of money being the actually important thing, which was a big issue with the whole. It's not about Bitcoin, it's about the underlying technology, is sort of this insistence that Bitcoin itself is not this incredibly interesting thing and that money is kind of boring. So the article is much more focused on that. And we're not going to be spending too much time getting into the weeds of particular blockchain technology stuff. So I just wanted to give that as a warning to the listener ahead of time. Because they might be a little disappointed, but there's much to say on that. Still, I think a overall very good article and excited to revisit.
Yeah, it's crazy that we're still having this debate 9 years later.
It never ends. But this is why we have to make this podcast, right?
Yeah, exactly. Keeps us busy.
Yeah, and this is also a long one, so I'm going to be reading a little faster than I usually do, so you can adjust the speed of the podcast as necessary. Blockchain technology. The Bitcoin world is full of people who know nothing about economics or cryptography. They only know that they could have made millions if they had not sold at the bottom. These people tell themselves that they are redeemable, that Bitcoin is just the MySpace of cryptocurrencies, that they will have another opportunity to get in early on some other revolution. These people can be dangerous, but most of them are easily preyed upon. I think this may explain the origin of, quote, blockchain technology. It lets people talk as if clones of Bitcoin are important without having to remind themselves of Bitcoin. If someone says blockchain technology to me, I give him the benefit of the doubt and write him off as someone who doesn't know what he's talking about. If I find out that he's intelligent, then he's most likely a con artist. When people say blockchain technology to you, you can replace it with mana or chakras or quantum, and it makes sense the same way. Blockchain technology has evolved into a sound Bitcoiners use to extract money from venture capitalists and one another, similar to the way that male birds use a song to attract females. It's a phrase for people who know there is a lot of money around, but don't exactly know where it's coming from. I don't see that there is a lot of use for some kind of general blockchain technology outside of its application in Bitcoin. In Bitcoin, the blockchain is a way of solving the double spending problem without privileging any party as to the creation of new units or of establishing a consistent history. This is an extremely costly and complicated way of maintaining an accounting ledger. How often do I really need to know to do my accountancy in this way? I would say that it is only a good idea when the game being played is so important that no one can safely be put in the position of referee. There are not a lot of things that I would really need that for, but I think there is a good argument to be made that a blockchain is a reasonable alternative to the monetary system under which the rest of the world is currently oppressed. Otherwise, I'd really rather be able to keep my accounting records to myself rather than leaving them out in public. There are no applications of blockchains which do not involve a double spending problem. A blockchain that was used for an application with no double spending problem is nothing more than a database, so you could just replace it with a distributed hash table. People have also used the blockchain for timestamping. This only works because Bitcoin has become a well-known as a point of reference. If you had a need for timestamps, you certainly wouldn't invent a blockchain to do it. Yet people are running around everywhere in the Bitcoin world screaming, blockchain, 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 for all kinds of non-intuitive purposes until they're buried under piles of money. I can't believe how long it's taking for people to get wise to this ruse, but I hope it won't last too much longer. A blockchain does not have a wide range of applications. However, there is one application, namely that of being a money, which is overwhelmingly important. And it has, in fact, lasted a very long time. So unfortunately, the hopes there did not come to fruition. I think that there's definitely this, a friend of ours has called it a regret market with Bitcoin, everyone wanting to just chase the gains that they feel like they should have gotten. And they're looking for the new thing that might be able to recreate that, early Bitcoin, mania that they can do. But I do think that there's other issues, which is, for instance, I don't think that people fundamentally understand why Bitcoin is, why money is so important, as a human institution, but also understanding why money is so broken, in today's world, minus Bitcoin. So Bitcoin kind of seems pointless or kind of mildly interesting, but for them, the problems it addresses are kind of shoved to the side. Like it's not important to them, and they imagine that they have much bigger problems that they want to handle, such as like a supply chains or something.
Yeah, I like to tell people that the next Bitcoin is Sats, yeah, your mileage may vary. All right,
It reminds me of a Murray Rothbard quote. It is no crime to be ignorant of economics, which is, after all, a specialized discipline and one that most people consider to be a dismal science, but it is totally irresponsible to have a loud and vociferous opinion on economic subjects while remaining in the state of ignorance. And likewise, it's like I don't blame people for not knowing everything about, money and Bitcoin and all of that. But, rather than how Daniel puts it of intelligent people, I think I would say it more directly as people who are trying to start businesses and get money out of other people. That's what it really starts to become irksome, that you would want to take on this thing, but you haven't really thought about it enough to realize that a blockchain is not the thing that's going to solve your problems.
Amen.
So, yeah, we'll continue on. Money as a hallucination. And we've talked about this again before, but we'll talk about it again. The foundational fallacy about money is to explain in physical terms what is really a sociological phenomenon. Gold is not valuable because it is durable, fungible, portable, and scarce. It is valuable because of a beneficial and self-sustaining tradition in which it has a special place. The physical properties of gold make such a tradition possible, but they do not determine that it will arise. Other goods with similar properties may also become the traditionally established monetary good. Bitcoin is the same way, of course. It could not run without the technology behind it, but what makes it important is the fact that it is seen as having value, thus making it exchangeable for goods and services. People who think blockchain technology is important are making the same kind of mistake as people who think gold has intrinsic value. What's weird to me is that I know I have heard many people express correct ideas about what money is, and then look at me like I'm crazy when I can seriously consider the implications of what they said. I have heard people say to me things like money is just a shared hallucination, or the value of money is whatever we all agree it is. Yes, that is correct. That's exactly what I'm saying. And if money is a shared hallucination, then you can't replicate Bitcoin's value by replicating the technology. You would have to also replicate the hallucination, which you can't. You'll have two blockchains, but only one of them has a shared hallucination. This makes one of them valuable, the other worthless. If that seems like a strange claim, think about the alternative. It means that it should be possible to create value for essentially no work. Every new blockchain ever produced was built on the premise that you can create a valuable investment that offers no income for the fixed cost of copying Bitcoin with alterations. There is nothing magic here. Human behaviors have real costs and benefits. Money may be little other than a bunch of people attributing value to something without much direct use. It doesn't matter if this sounds ridiculous. If there is a behavior that corresponds to this belief which benefits people, then they will keep behaving that way. Other people had better understand what they're doing, or else they will become relatively poorer. And I think we talked about this sort of terminology of hallucination, which over time has become much less enjoyed by the Bitcoin community. I'm certainly one of the people who is not so much a fan of describing this, but I do want to point out that Daniel's use of it is not quite the same as, say, like the Yuval Harari way, where the Yuval Harari way and something like Sapiens is just, we just wake up and decide this thing's money, and then everyone just like goes ahead with it, and that's great. But Daniel does point to the fact that it's underlying technologies, the properties that make up the good in question, that is what allows that tradition to take hold. But on the other hand, it doesn't mean that people are going to actually use that particular technology. So, in the case of gold has a lot of great properties. But you still had economies choosing other things when they had silver available. That was what they were using. And when they come into contact, that's when we can look at the competitive nature of it. But then when we look here in the context of altcoins, you really can have, people ask this question, what stops you from just copying Bitcoin? And the answer is nothing. But the reason that you don't, or rather the reason you shouldn't, is because there's already a network effect around a particular instantiation of that idea. And so you have to be able to overcome that. You have to make people have a reason to abandon an already established social consensus and all of the sort of economic power underneath it, and decide instead to start at scratch again. And there's not really a reason to do such a thing. And so in that sense, it is sort of a hallucination in the sense that it is a social construct, but it's a social construct that's built around real economic value that's developed, and that is developed around real technology that's actually capable of delivering on those needs.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, though, that if you think that anything is money other than Bitcoin, you are hallucinating.
Yes, that's a good point too. The market has been quite clear about that. I think rather than just saying yes to the people that say, the value of money is whatever we all agree it is, rather than merely saying yes, like, yeah, we value this, we then have to go a level deeper, which is to ask, why was it that they chose that in particular? So where did that value specifically come from? And to simply end it with, oh, it's a hallucination, does not pick up on all of the underlying economics, the underlying technology that can really help us understand why Bitcoin was chosen, for instance. It kind of just hand waves away the entire question. So I appreciate Daniel's particular use of this, but I would disagree with kind of using that term to describe the phenomenon. Continuing on, money as a behavior. The overwhelmingly most popular thing to do with gold is to store it away and leave it for long periods of time. Therefore, an explanation for the price of gold should mostly depend on the reasons someone would want something that is good for being stored away, with some minor additions due to gold's use as jewelry and in industry. We can study money as behavior by abstracting away all the uses of money other than that of storing it. No matter how silly that sounds, we know that it must be good for something because people actually do it and have been for some time. When I talk about money as a behavior, what that means is that everybody has a socially established number that is objectively associated with them. They can show other people how much they have, and everyone will agree as to what the number is. People can do something which subtracts from this number and adds to another person's number. Also, people demand to have higher numbers. This means that they are willing to give up other things in order to increase their number. If we know the costs and benefits of increasing the number, then we can understand the price of these numbers on the market. There can be many reasons that people are able to behave in this way. The numbers could correspond to amounts of a physical good like gold or wampum, which people physically pass among one another. They could correspond to numbers which are managed and guaranteed by an institution, like dollars or World of Warcraft gold. Or it could be numbers that are stored in a blockchain, as in Bitcoin. Or maybe we all just use the honor system and keep track of our own balances and don't cheat. Often, economists define money in a way that makes money a unique good in an economy. I do not define money this way. There could be more than one good which acts like a money. Instead, I will show that in the long term, I would expect a single money to dominate. And there, I would disagree with the uniqueness in the sense that at least when economists like Mises defines money as a unique good, there's two separate uniques I guess we could talk about. There's money as a uniquely generally accepted medium of exchange. So it's a thing that completely dominates the sort of medium of exchange function. And in that sense, I do agree with Daniel, as we've discussed previously about, Mises talking about secondary media of exchange being, a perfectly acceptable way to look at Bitcoin while it's still growing and is still smaller than its competitor, the US dollar. But there's the other way of understanding money as unique, which Mises says it's a sui generis good. That is, it has a unique thing about it in relation to other economic goods. It's not used to be consumed, and it's not used as a capital good to produce other goods. It is unique as just a medium of exchange. And even like most durable goods, they're really consumer goods that are consumed over a long period of time, like or sort of like an insurance, like prepper supplies. But the intention of having it is ultimately consumption, whereas money, you never consume money. Continuing on, the risk of money. Money is often explained in terms of the inconvenience of trading in a barter system. While bartering might well be inconvenient, that alone is not enough to explain the existence of money. It would certainly be nice if we could all settle on a good to use as money. However, there is no guarantee that everyone will be nice enough to do that. It is possible to imagine a tribe of people who are all very good economists and who all understand and like the idea of money without having enough confidence in one another as to get it working for real. The first person among them would be taking a risk because he would have to work or sell his property in exchange for something that's good for not much other than being stored. His risk would only pay off if everyone else was willing to follow suit. And how could they possibly guarantee to him that they would really would do so? For almost a year, this was what it was like in Bitcoin. Although Bitcoiners suspected that Bitcoin could be money someday, its price was zero. Consequently, it was completely useless as a form of money. For a long time, Bitcoiners wanted the price to be higher than zero, but they could not make it so just by wanting it. Bitcoin did not fundamentally change as a piece of software when it first developed a price. The only thing that changed was people's willingness to trade dollars for it. In general, there is always an individual cost to accepting money, even when the use of money is very widespread. If I work in an exchange for money, how do I know that money will still be valuable by the time work is out and I am ready to do my shopping? If I work for something I can directly consume, then at least I can get some utility out of it no matter what. But if I accept something whose main use is as a medium of exchange, then I am depending on there being future people willing to accept that money later. This is why people can't just will money into existence and why the inconvenience of a barter system cannot explain the existence of money. There is a risk. In order to explain why people would use money, we need an individual benefit to match with the individual cost. Otherwise, people would never prefer to use money, no matter how socially beneficial it was. And I do think that that's actually a rather interesting point, that barter alone can be inconvenient, but the emergence of money does require a sort of, it's based on social expectations. So if a good does not exist in that barter economy that anyone can identify as potentially being useful to make more indirect exchange, it's not going to happen. Now, I think that's extremely theoretical, because I think in a practical system, people would still probably find some. But it does, I think, raise some interesting questions of how maybe the Austrian theory could better explain that emergence of money, going that 0 to 1 process.
Yeah, I agree.
So this is also, entrepreneurs can't force people to accept their money. So
as much as we'd like to.
Yeah. So, every Bitcoiner, and, this is, we get attacked for being speculators as if that's a bad thing. But it really is just, we should in some sense it should be taken seriously as an activity of, someone willing to take a risk because they see a potential future, and that in and of itself is not a bad thing. And in fact, if it comes to fruition, those are the very people who would have helped it come to fruition. But it's ultimately based on actual economic activity, and you can't just sort of make different, quote, tokenomics in order to make it happen. It has to actually be providing real world benefits as a medium of exchange. The utility of money. There is an individual benefit to using money, and it's very simple. The person who accepts money gets to defer his decisions about what to buy at a later time. Someone who does not want to use money must have a better idea about what he is going to do with the goods he receives in payment than the person who accepts money. When one has money, then one is not committed. If I am the first person to accept money in payment and my bet on it pays off, then I have the option to choose what I want later, and I do not have to choose based on the limited information I have now. This benefit explains why someone would want something that is good for keeping in storage. If he wants to keep his options open, then he can open his vault at the moment the right opportunity comes along. I have now provided a trade-off which, I contend, explains the value of money. I have not proved that there are no other costs and benefits to using money, but I don't know of any others. If someone can show me that there is another reason to hold money, please do. Now I'll talk about what this trade-off implies for the value of money. And we've usually said this as it's a hedge against future uncertainty. That's how we've put it many times. But that's exactly what he's describing here. And it really is as simple as money is a thing that you can receive, you can hold, and you can spend. And that holding is the confusing part for people, despite that it's necessary for the other parts to happen.
Yeah, and in this podcast series, we've pointed to a lot of things where we might say, this prediction didn't pan out, or this evolved. This is really what is timeless, what has always been, what is today, what will always be, is this functionality of money.
That's a good point. We've talked before how, we were talking about savings and such from a early time. But even with this is putting it starkly that it's not just that savings is good, but also that there's not really much more to it. Payments are tied to this whole process, but there's a reason people put a lot of gold in vaults. As silly as that seems, it just requires thinking through the opportunity costs and the uncertainty that people are facing if you want to understand why it's happening rather than just see it and be perplexed. The value of money. In this article, I mean value in the investment sense. So the value of money is the purpose it serves in your portfolio and how much you would want. For the investor, the value of money is determined by the trade-off of commitment versus optionality. If he wants more deferred choices, then he needs more cash. If he wants more income, then he should get stocks or bonds. The reason someone might want to defer his choices is because there are limited periods of time in which investments go on sale. A difficult thing about business is that it is easy to make mistakes whose consequences are not evident until long after they are unavoidable. When that happens, a business needs cash in order to survive long enough to correct itself. During these times, good businesses can be bought cheaply for limited periods of time. This is why an investor wants a cash balance ready to spend. You never know what is coming, but if you have cash, you are prepared for whatever it is. Holding a stock is a commitment to a particular enterprise, whereas cash keeps your options open. The reason that buying an investment is a commitment is that you cannot always sell an investment easily for cash. It might go on sale, just as in the previous paragraph, and then the investor cannot get the same amount of cash back that he put into it. If there is a crash, the investor might not be able to follow through on his commitment and must sell at a loss. On the other hand, an investor who can realistically make the commitment won't care so much if there is a recession because he is prepared to weather safely through any bad times. The interesting thing about the trade-off of optionality versus commitment is that changes in the overall use of money in an economy can change the nature of that trade-off for an individual person. The more demand for money there is, the less risky it is for an individual person to hold money. If you were the first person to sell goods or labor for money, then you would probably look insane or immensely stupid to bet that other people would want this stuff in the future. On the other hand, if many people are using money, then you are merely depending on there not being a hyperinflationary event in the immediate future. In that case, you might look insane or stupid for worrying about such a remote possibility at all. In short, money becomes more useful the more people use it. This may seem like a very obvious conclusion, given how many words I took to arrive at it, but it has some funny implications that are hard for a lot of people in Bitcoin to accept because they have money riding on a presumption that the opposite is true. As more people begin to hold money, the rational response of everyone else is to try to hold more than they already have. Everyone, therefore, will try to increase his cash balance at the same time, and they will do this by bidding larger amounts of other goods in exchange for it. In other words, all prices tend to go down and money becomes more valuable. Effectively, everyone ends up with more money, except that they end up with more valuable units of money rather than higher sums of it. And furthermore, they end up with larger fractions of their portfolio in money as well. And that's just a continuation on it, but it's such a good summary, I think, of exactly what we're discussing. The one thing people thinking they're like you're insane because you're the first person with money. This was making me think, going back, it was like that 0 to 1 process. I assume part of the early stages of getting out of barter is just recognizing what other people want and starting to acquire that good on purpose just because you want to do it. Like you get bananas just because the guy who is selling fish wants bananas, and so you're only thinking on the order of like one other person, and it sort of just emerges out of that basic indirect exchange. And so I don't know that you would have a situation, in like a primordial economy where someone is just being very insane and, comes across gold and immediately jumps on it, I think there'd probably already be basic levels of indirect exchange that you're building that on. And Szabo goes into, jewelry and collectibles and such as, some of the origins of gold as money. Continuing on, the network effect. This is the opposite of how most investments work. If the price of a stock goes up, then the value decreases because its dividend yield is smaller in proportion to its price. If the price goes up too much, an investor would eventually want to sell for something cheaper. By contrast, $100 worth of Bitcoins today has a better value than $100 worth several years ago, even though the price of Bitcoin is much greater. The value is better because there are more opportunities to unload the Bitcoins at the owner's discretion. A positive feedback between price and value implies that the growth and shrinkage of money can be self-sustaining. One might well find this conclusion hard to accept. After all, value in a business is built by hard work and careful strategy, whereas money can somehow drive its own value according to me. I would invite anyone to explain Bitcoin's value any other way. And saying bubble doesn't count because that's virtually the same thing. Money is basically a self-sustaining bubble. We don't yet know if Bitcoin will arrive at a self-sustaining state. And even if it doesn't, the blockchain tech people are still wrong because in that case, there would be no good blockchains rather than one. What would a self-sustaining bubble look like? Naturally, there must be a limit to the growth of money. As the value of money increases, eventually the individual benefits of holding more of it will go down. This happens as the market cap of currency becomes a larger and larger fraction of the whole economy. There are only so many errors that the economy produces for a cash holder to take advantage of. The economy becomes saturated with money once there are enough investors sitting around with piles of money such that they are able to catch all the errors that are worthwhile. At that point, it is no longer individually beneficial to hold more money even if the value of money has gone up. This prevents the value of money from going up further until more people or businesses are added to the economy. This limit is independent of the underlying technology of the money. If people were sufficiently honest, it could run on nothing but the honor system. Thus, the value of money is a macroeconomic phenomenon, even for a tiny quirky cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. This is the reason why Bitcoin can be worthless one year and valuable the next without a fundamental change to the software or protocol, and why it can range in price by enormous margins over short periods of time for reasons that seem inscrutable. It's because the value of money is a shared hallucination, and the price is caused by the vividness of that hallucination. So in that sense, yes, like we do see every hype cycle, people coming in and they go from not knowing about Bitcoin or not understanding it to understanding it, which causes them to participate in the social technology that is Bitcoin, which involves, acquiring this, and it drives up the price. Yeah, I think, once again, I understand where he in particular is coming at with the notion of hallucination. And that in and of itself is rather interesting just to see that Bitcoin's fundamentals have basically been, for the most part, the same in terms of, just offering a way to receive, hold, and spend Bitcoins. There's definitely been improvements, but the basic function has remained the same, but more and more people start to get it, and that causes Bitcoin to grow even if it hasn't changed at all.
Yep, I agree with that.
Yeah, I think that's especially interesting with the altcoin discussion. We previously talked about, wanting features and so on and so forth. But, this section is helping show why, it's not merely features that draw in more people. It can just be a better understanding of what already exists.
I saw a VC tweet something very wise. He was like, a product is failing when they keep adding features because they're not finding that product market fit. And so I think that's a very apt point here.
Yes, and there's a funny twist on that in Bitcoin because you also have people who because they don't understand the monetary value of Bitcoin, based on what we've been talking about, what money offers, they think it's a failure, and they want to be adding features as this sort of what they perceive as this sort of stopgap of like, okay, well, how can we get people to actually be using it?
Yeah.
And so they fall into that trap because they misunderstand Bitcoin as they think it's losing even though it's winning.
Yeah, and from a product management perspective, they're not listening to the users. They're not listening to the market. They're ideologically, dogmatically attached to, monetary use cases are speculative. We need non-monetary use cases.
I very rarely, and by rarely, I mean never, just talk to a new person about Bitcoin and their concern was whether or not they'd be able to use it for, something like arbitrary data storage. They've always been, most interested specifically in money. It is the largest. Like what product can even be bigger in terms of the potential market, the potential of number of users and such. So yeah, it's very important to understand monetary value so that we don't go down the wrong paths of trying to do things that are completely unnecessary, but not only completely unnecessary, but basically malinvestments that take away from what could have been if people were more focused on perfecting that product.
Yep.
How Bitcoin's value is created. For a year after Bitcoin was first released, it had no price and was quite worthless. Therefore, the value was not created when the software was originally developed. It was caused by step-by-step investments that came later. Since it first gained a price, Bitcoin has had periods of rapid price increases. There can be events which are set off for no apparent reason, in which Bitcoin's price drives itself rapidly up or down. A small price increase is interpreted as an increase in demand. An increase in demand would mean that Bitcoin is becoming more useful and therefore more valuable. Hence, more people buy in and cause another price increase. These manias make people outside wonder if Bitcoin is for real. They make people who previously thought that Bitcoin was stupid to think that they should maybe buy just a little bit in case there could actually be something to it. In other words, they're starting to think that Bitcoin is good for the only thing that money is actually good for, which is to be kept just in case. Above, I wrote about the hypothetical idea of a tribe of economists who all wanted to develop a money economy but could not because each felt the investment to be too risky. Here is how they could solve that problem. They could go around in a circle and take turns investing tiny amounts. Then none of them has to take a big risk. Their economy would not be monetized after one round, but they could see who among them was willing to take a small risk. If they had all shown themselves willing to invest a little bit, then many of them would be willing to risk a second round. If the game should proceed well, the economists would start to think about how wealthy each would be if they managed to get more than the rest. Soon the game would cease to be orderly as they tried to sell as much as possible in order to buy the new money while it was still cheap. Bitcoin did not arise out of a barter system. The dollar and the other state-managed currencies had long since subsumed nearly all trade. However, the circulation of the initial investors to Bitcoin was very similar to that which faced the economist tribesmen. It was clear to many that Bitcoin would be cool if you could actually buy things with it. However, you can't buy anything with it, and its investment prospects depend on the presumption that it somehow one day will be demanded in exchange for goods. How could one even estimate the risk of such a possibility? The fact that other currencies already existed does not change the problem. From the perspective of a Bitcoin investor, Bitcoin might well have existed in a barter system in which dollars, yuan, euro, pound, and yen were traded rather than tea, silk, salt, and flint. The only difference is that the national currencies are better competitors than tea or salt, so their risk is greater if Bitcoin had arose in a real barter system. Do you have anything to add on that one?
No, nothing comes to mind to add there.
All right. Competing currencies. I am not against competing currencies in the sense of thinking people should be physically prevented from creating them. I am against competing currencies in the sense that I think currency competition is inherently monopolistic and that it is extremely dishonest or stupid to promote a new currency as an investment without taking this reality into account. So I am against competing currencies in the sense that someone who creates a new currency had better be able to present a case that his idea is capable of replacing the current system and should be treated as a con artist otherwise. The fact that money has a positive feedback between demand and value implies that there cannot normally be a stable equilibrium between two monies. Any initial imbalance between them would tend to expand. If one currency was slightly more preferred than the other, people would react to this by demanding slightly more. This makes the preferred even more preferable than before. Any two monies will interact this way, thus leaving one to dominate the rest. Many people get fooled upon first entering Bitcoin because they think diversification is important. The problem with diversification is that it is possible to create an infinite amount of bullshit at no cost. And if you diversify into that, you lose everything. A diversification only makes sense among investments which are not bullshit. If we were looking at a bunch of stocks that already paid dividends, then diversification would make sense. On the other hand, there are potentially an infinite number of scam coins. During late 2013 and early 2014, new ones were being produced and hawked every day. They can be produced at this rate until everyone who thinks diversification is a good idea goes broke. Now that all the dumbest people have gone broke, the focus has shifted to using blockchain tech to exploit ignorant venture capitalists. There is always some risk in accepting money in payment, even something well established like dollars. If everyone settles on the same money, then they have coordinated so as to reduce the risk, that risk as much as possible. If you expect people to use two currencies, you have to have some reason that both would offset risk in different ways. I have never seen an altcoiner or blockchain tech enthusiast come anywhere near to addressing this issue. Clearly, if two currencies are virtually identical, such as Bitcoin and Litecoin, then whichever currency is bigger has the advantage. Recently, Litecoin's price has decoupled from Bitcoin somewhat, so maybe people have finally figured this out. Once Litecoin loses its shared hallucination, no amount of sloganeering will bring it back. And there's a chart of Litecoin prices just going down in relation to Bitcoin prices.
It's only gotten worse.
Much, much worse. And you can go across the whole altcoin graveyard and see it for basically all of them, even Ethereum now, which gets mentioned here. But what about something more elaborate? Let's pretend for a moment that Ethereum actually worked and was something that competed with Bitcoin on some level. Do its smart contracts give it a serious advantage over Bitcoin? I don't see how Ethereum's smart contract system would tend to bring in opportunities to unload ethers, which are superior to the opportunities provided by Bitcoin. No matter how cool smart contracts sound, they make Ethereum just another app coin. And as with other app coins, people will reduce the risk of holding them by not holding them, or holding them for as short a time as possible. This will drive the price down until they are useless in trade. By the way, I would prefer to be called a, quote, Bitcoin minimalist rather than a Bitcoin maximalist, because the other blockchains appear useless and are easily eliminated. And yeah, on that last part, a good lesson of forced memes just really don't work. So at the time, I also thought that was sort of a clever, coinage, Bitcoin minimalist, because part of the claim with Bitcoin maximalist is that we wanted everything on Bitcoin. We wanted all the supply chain, this or that thing to be built on Bitcoin, but really we just wanted it to focus on money in a sort of Unix philosophy, do one thing and do it well kind of way. But it unfortunately doesn't stick. Whereas Bitcoin maximalist, which had started as a pejorative, worked very well. So that sticked better by reframing it or just kind of ignoring pejoratives. But it can be hard to sort of just force a meme like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. And then now we've seen people try to force memes like Bitcoin rationalists. They try to find other things. But I've also heard us referred to as monetary maximalists, which that makes a lot of sense.
Yes. Focused on, within Bitcoin, what are the things that we're actually focused on? And I think it's obvious from articles like this in our discussion that, money really is that thing. Bitcoin versus the dollar. On the other hand, Bitcoin improves over the dollar and other fiat currencies where it actually counts. The dollar is not very good for storing just in case. Over long periods, it loses value due to inflation. You can't carry cash around or the police will take it. And if you leave it in a bank, you can have your account frozen and the money drained if you use it for purposes deemed unacceptable. You cannot own dollars the way that you can own Bitcoins. It is not that Bitcoin comes at no risk. It is rather that you can always expect to have the same fraction of the total later on if you secure them properly. The national currencies are affected by forces which are beyond your knowledge or control. They are managed by committees serving the governments issuing them. The people on these committees speak in a jargon that is not only incomprehensible to most people, but unbearably dull even to those who do understand it. Everyone is affected by them, but most people will not bother to learn to understand them. They manage the currency in the national interest, or claim to, which is not always the same thing as your interest. They can change the rules about how the currency can be spent. You can use them or increase how you can use them or increase the government's supply. It is usually not possible to predict what they will do at least over long time spans. This is not possible under Bitcoin's current rules, and it would be difficult to change them in ways that might eventually enable anything similar. Although many new Bitcoins will be created in the future, the release schedule is publicly known and is therefore already priced into current Bitcoins. Therefore, Bitcoin will not lose value as a result of inflation. It might lose value as a result of losing popularity, and this risk is greater than that of the dollars at the moment. Thus, there is a genuine qualitative difference between Bitcoin and the dollar from an investment standpoint. It doesn't mean that Bitcoin will necessarily defeat the dollar. It just means that Bitcoin has a relevant competitive edge. There are still significant disadvantages to Bitcoin. It is slow to confirm and difficult to maintain anonymity. However, Bitcoin has done well against the dollar so far, and there is real-world commerce that has grown to rely on it. In addition, every time Bitcoin grows, its risks decline relative to the dollars. And I think he's a little too nice there in relation to with the disadvantage. Slow to confirm, I think is true in relation to a cash payment at a store, but in terms of final settlement in the dollar world, that typically happens through credit and debit systems that are extremely complex and difficult, and take a lot of time. So in many ways, Bitcoin's confirmation is very fast, especially when you add in Lightning to be able to do instant settlement. So this was before Lightning had come to fruition.
But it's also like if we're really monetary maximalists, then the payments part is. I don't know how to say this without triggering lots of people, but it's like we could use Bitcoin denominated, Bitcoin-backed Visa network for sending payments, and so I almost feel like it's neither here nor there.
Yes, I understand what you mean. I've used Visa internationally in a sort of borderless fashion, and it was just as fast as it was using it here in the United States. So the sort of payment stuff, I think it's important that we have strong payments infrastructure on Bitcoin. But in many ways, just broadly speaking, payments infrastructure already exists in quite a phenomenal way. But Bitcoin's addition to it will allow better things like not needing as much personal information in order to actually get fraud taken care of, because that's less of an issue. So it's not that Bitcoin doesn't help it, but I think people sometimes can be quick to understate how well the payment system actually does work.
And it would just add another word to monetary asset maximalist. Anyway, you can go too far in either direction, but just pointing that out.
Yes. So final thoughts. The reason, therefore, that the monetary aspects of Bitcoin are particularly interesting is the possibility that Bitcoin could become the preferred good for being stored away. If it did, then its value would grow until it was a significant part of the world economy. That would be a significant change for the world and for Bitcoin's early adopters. Call me crazy, but I think that the possibility that possibility is more important than the possibility of applications of blockchains outside of Bitcoin, and is a lot more likely too. Bitcoin, the protocol, is like a great work of engineering. Its pieces are all adapted to its function. It's not about the technology, but what the technology enables. That is most interesting. The blockchain as a concept has had no reason to escape the esoteric circles of developers and engineers. Yet, when people looked at Bitcoin, the only terms by which they knew how to understand it was as a new technology. But Bitcoin is more like a new tradition than a new technology. As if a small section of the crowd in a packed stadium has started to do the wave, and you can bet on whether the wave will eventually fill up the entire stadium. Altcoiners are the people who start doing the wave by themselves and end up cringe because they're the only guy trying to stand up and wave his hands. If someone says blockchain tech to you, you might as well walk away right there. They're just trying to sell you on their new decentralized crowd-funded blockchain tech, Internet of Bit Things app scam. You know that they're lying because everyone who acts like them is a liar, and someone who is not a liar would actually do something to distinguish himself from them. Someone who knew what he was talking about would know that you can't just string a bunch of buzzwords together in order to generate an idea that makes sense. Unfortunately, if a lack of basic critical thought is widespread, and if everyone becomes invested in everyone else's stupidity, then nobody wants to know either, at least not before they've found a favorable time to exit their position. This will probably never happen, because although they may think they're preying on other people's stupidity, they're more likely to being preyed upon instead. So, like I said, this is more, defending money as not just, the first app, as people like to say, but, it's actually the fundamental app that needed to be made for Bitcoin to have any reason to exist, and understanding money as a fundamental pillar of civilization and not just, another thing you open up on your phone. So I think there could have been maybe an even longer article that sort of steelmanned, the purported benefits of blockchain, and then maybe show why it's not useful to solving those problems, and even more so explaining how some of these problems, many of the things that people were worried about are real problems, but a blockchain was not going to be the thing that would solve it. And perhaps you could do work to talk about the better infrastructure. So like when people want to make a new blockchain for timestamping, perhaps they can learn about, using something like open timestamps that has very minimal footprint on Bitcoin, but is able to do timestamping for a highly scalable amount of information. I think understanding money is extremely important. And, we went through these thoughts, and I'm thankful for it. It's left me as I guess we determined, monetary asset maximalist. I think as more people can hopefully pick up on these ideas, and as Bitcoin continues to win, more people will start to understand Bitcoin's value and why they should participate, and store it away. Thank you for listening to The Reorg. This podcast is brought to you by the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute, dedicated to advancing and preserving Bitcoin knowledge. Our mission is to deepen understanding and appreciation of Bitcoin, not just for today, but for generations to come, by creating enduring educational resources and generational knowledge for generational wealth. If you enjoyed the show, please support our work by sharing links, deepening your own Bitcoin knowledge by exploring and studying the S&I archives, and contributing sats. As a 501c nonprofit, we rely entirely on supporters like you. Whether you can give a few Satoshis or a few thousand Bitcoins, your contributions enable us to continue educating current and future Bitcoiners worldwide.